Good morning, Warzone kids. Man, it ain't quite the first day of spring yet, but it's getting here. If you see this smile on my face, that's because I lived in Vermont for 20 years, more than that. And I grew up in Oklahoma. And Oklahoma taught me a proper appreciation for summertime and the hot sun. Because, man, it is a palpable presence in Oklahoma in the summertime. You can feel it pushing you down as soon as you step outside. It did not, growing up in Oklahoma, did not teach me a proper appreciation for spring. Because it was cold in the wintertime, but we didn't hardly get much snow. We got more freezing rain than snow. And it never really got that cold, very rarely. Vermont's a different ball game. Vermont will teach you proper appreciation for springtime because it is dark and cold here for a long time. I mean, usually from early December until sometime in March or sometimes April. The icy hand of winter clamps down on you and it stays clamped down. And you know it's been here. So I have a full, rich, deep appreciation for springtime now. I do my running on my treadmill in the wintertime, and man, was it nice to run outside Monday. Yesterday's my day off from running. Man, was it nice to run outside. Actual street, birds, the sky, the breeze. Man, was it beautiful. And I hope that you have a beautiful day too, whether you're a Warzone kid or not. Warzone kids is my term for those of us whose childhoods is more like a low-grade guerrilla war against your psyche, or maybe an all-out carpet-bombing humanitarian crisis of a war against your psyche, your soul. I'm a child sex abuse survivor, and as an adult, I live with borderline personality disorder. I'm a recovering addict and bulimic. And I think of my soul, my psyche, as a Jenga tower. You know that game where it starts off with a big block made up of smaller blocks? And with each turn, you take off one of those smaller blocks from where it belongs, and you put it on top of that Jenga tower. And with each turn, that Jenga tower gets a little bit taller and a little bit more rickety. The center of gravity shifts, and it becomes less stable. And every game of Jenga ends the same way. It ends when that Jenga tower falls down. And as a Warzone kid, every bit of harm, abuse, neglect that you experience in your childhood takes pieces out of your psyche where they belong and puts them on top, makes it less stable. You might be a child sex abuse survivor like this guy. You might have had a lot of physical harm and physical abuse, which was not a big part of my experience. But you might also have had psychological abuse, which was, emotional abuse, which was. You might have had societal abuse, racial, gender, cultural. You might just be the wrong kind of person, according to the people you grew up around, whatever it was. You might have grown up in an actual war zone. You know, with actual straight up armed combat and trauma of that kind. Trauma is just a Greek word for wound. All that harm, abuse, and neglect takes pieces out of your Jenga tower and puts them on top, and you can find yourself as an adult Warzone kid living a whole life geared around just trying to keep that Jenga tower from falling down. Don't get close to it, don't touch it, don't breathe. You're managing to keep this whole thing together. You're managing to keep yourself together to some extent or another, and you're desperately afraid. I've been desperately afraid that my Jenga tower was going to collapse, my whole life would fall apart. Well, I can tell you, Pilgrim, my life has fallen apart, I would say, numerous times in different ways. I call you Pilgrim because I think of life as a pilgrimage to the Western lands, the place of peace and wholeness where we learn and become what we are. And I think of life as a pilgrimage to that land. Pilgrimage is an act of devotion itself. The journey is a big part of the destination. You cannot arrive at the destination without taking the journey. And all that's on my mind because I'm what they call a volunteer circle keeper for Green Circles at Hidden Water. That's an organization that facilitates healing circles by and for those affected by child sex abuse. Green Circles are for child sex abuse survivors like myself. There are circles for non-offending parents of child sex abuse survivors. There are circles for loved ones of child sex abuse survivors. And there are circles for those who've caused harm to children and are ready to take responsibility and make amends. And we each have our own colors. I'm in a green circle. There's blue, orange, and purple. And the circle keepers are just participants. And we kind of, someone's got to start the Zoom meeting and keep the spreadsheet and make the thing go without really being in charge of it. We're just participants. And we talked in the circle last night. We're in week 3. The circle season lasts for 12 weeks. We're in week 3, and you spend the first 3 weeks doing what we call container building. You kind of, everyone gets to know each other, and we kind of establish a way, an ethos, a way of being around each other, a secure perimeter. I'm a Gen X from Oklahoma. I grew up in a military family around a lot of vets. And talking about safe spaces and whatnot is very important. I know exactly what people are talking about when they talk about safe space, and I need one. So do you, so do all of us. Someplace where your psyche is not in harm's way. But somehow I like thinking of it as a secure perimeter. The 3 little pigs wanted a secure perimeter to keep them wolves out. And it takes a while to build that. It takes a while to build a brick house. You can build a house out of straw, that ain't going to last that long. You can build a house out of wood, and that ain't going to last as long. You can build a house out of bricks, and that's a more secure perimeter, keep the wolves out and keep each other safe. So I think of it like that. There's 8 of us in the circle, and it takes us 8 little piggies 3 weeks to build a brick house, to build a brick circle, so we can have a secure perimeter. Well, what we talked about this week is what in Hidden Water we call the path toward healing from harm. And I talk about this a lot. You start off, you're in the sea of suffering. You live a life based around just coping skills, and you see a lot of damage. As I say, I live with borderline personality disorder. I'm a recovering addict and bulimic, to use that language. If you listed out coping behaviors, acting out, chaos financially, chaos in interpersonal relationships, physical chaos, not taking care of my body, stuffing Oreos and peanut butter down my gullet, try to change how I feel, stuffing drugs into my body, try to change how I feel. I'm kind of a monogamous by nature. I'm prone to these, intense, fiery Jamie and Cersei kind of relationships, doomed from the outset, doomed to end in Magar's stronghold and everything falls down around you. That's kind of my natural behavior romantically. I ain't doing that right now because I don't like Magar's stronghold. It's fallen down and crushed me numerous times. And a lot of what feels like love to me is really just a flaming airplane crash. It's the feeling of being in a flaming airplane headed toward the ground. And I don't need any more of that. But anyway, that's when you're lost in a sea of suffering on the path toward healing from harm. You're still trying to keep that Jenga tower up. After you make your way out of the sea of suffering, you kind of wash up on the island of facing. The Isle of Facing is what I call it. Where you start to become aware of the damage done to you. You start to become aware of the reality of your life. It's real easy from the outside to people that aren't child sex abuse survivors to hear stories about recovered memories and people telling you that they didn't realize that something was abuse when it was. I understand that that can be very hard to absorb if you're not the one who's saying it. But all I can tell you is it's real. It can take a tremendous amount of effort to allow yourself to build the psychic strength that you need to face the reality of what your father did, what your mother did, what your brother or sister or grandfather or grandmother or aunt or uncle or the person next door or the priest. It can take a lot of growth and healing before you can even become fully aware of the reality of your life. And when that happens, it's very often accompanied with a lot of strong feelings. Grief, sadness, anger, rage, the thirst for justice, the quest for vengeance, all of that. These are all things that you find lying around on the beach when you wash up on the island of Facing. And it can feel like you're going to spend your whole life on that beach. But there is a far shore. There are the Western lands. There is a place of peace and wholeness. And that's the third element in the path toward healing from harm. Releasing and moving on. That's what they call it. Releasing and moving on. That's where life is. It's all life, but understand, that's where the life on the other side of suffering and facing and rage and anger and sadness and pain, there is life that transcends all that and goes beyond it. And I'll tell you something about those three stages: the sea of suffering, the island of facing, and then the Western lands. It's just what I call them. It's like when I was a kid, they used to talk about the 7 stages of grief. You know, you got your denial, your wheeling and dealing with the gods, acceptance, bargaining, all that stuff. They used to talk about the 7 stages. And then someone come along and said, no, it's not really like stages, it's like phases, and you can move back and forth. It's not like you're in step 1 and then eventually get to step 7 and you're all better. It ain't really like that. You go back and forth. Well, for us child sex abuse survivors, there can be some very profound ways in which we're alienated from ourselves, and you can spend a whole life being alienated from yourself and living in this inside out funhouse mirror world where the reality of your life and what happened to you only exists in your head. Because somewhere deep in there, you know what the reality was, and that's your real experience. And the reality of the outside world seems fake, because that's full of people that caused you harm and people that knew about it and didn't do nothing, or they could have known, or they should have known, or they made it a full-time job looking the other way, so they made sure they never knew. And your whole life can be full of that. Your real life on the outside of your eyeballs can be full of this illusory hogwash. And the reality, the truth, is inside, on the inside of your eyeballs, where only you know it. Now, there ain't no peace for the human soul. That's a recipe for suffering right there, where your reality is only on the inside of your eyeballs and you barely even know what it was. And the real reality, to call it that, the outside of your eyeballs, the cosmos, the external world, is an illusion. That can be exactly what it feels like. And if you're a Warzone kid, I'll bet you can identify with some element in it. There ain't no happiness in that. That's a recipe for suffering. And as you move out of that, you can be in all 3 phases at the same time in different parts of your world. Part of you can be in the Western lands, parts of you can still be lost in the sea of suffering, and parts of you are still washed up on the beach in the Isle of Facing, full of rage and anger. And I can look at my own life and tell you that at this present moment right here, parts of me are in all 3 of those different places. But I bet you can identify with that if you're a Warzone kid. I bet you can find somewhere in there. There's parts of my life that are unrecognizably different than they were just a few years ago, a few months ago. when you start off on the path toward life, the path to the Western lands, like they say in Chinese fortune cookies, the journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step. That's a true statement. And after your Jenga tower, for most of us, we don't really have the motivation to start that journey until the Jenga tower falls down. Because while that Jenga tower is still a leaning, teetering, tottering, leaning tower of psyche, you're trying to keep it up. And you think that that's life. You think that's all. I thought that was all my life was going to be, trying to keep that Jenga tower from toppling over. But I can tell you this, boys and girls, I feel like in many ways, my life didn't start till that Jenga tower fell down a few times. Because it was only after my Jenga tower collapsed that I really and truly got serious about taking steps on that 1,000-mile journey to the Western lands. And it ain't even that easy, because it might be 100,000 miles, it might be measured in light years, it might be 6 inches. You don't know. All you know, all I knew was I had to start going in that direction toward life. Now, it's all life. When you're in the sea of suffering, that's your life, that's your existence. But the fullness and richness of the Western lands, I'm also calling that life. The quest, the journey toward life. And that journey is done one step at a time, and all you can ever do is take today's steps on the trail to the Western lands. You can call it the path toward healing from harm. You can call it the path toward happiness from suffering. I practice Zen, and there's a lot of talk of suffering in anything related to Buddhism. I don't even know if I'd say I'm a Buddhist. I just say that I practice Zen. Well, suffering is when you're mired in yourself and you're lost in that sea of suffering and coping, trying to make it from one day to the next, trying to keep your mind off anything except the reality of your life. That's suffering. And when I say it's a path from suffering to happiness, word happiness, I would say eudaimonia. I'll teach you some ancient Greek. Eudaimonia, a good spirit. When I say happiness, I don't mean giddy, laughing, chuckling, like a 10-year-old at a birthday party. A good spirit, balance, a good spirit, where your psyche, your Jenga tower, is in way better shape than it was. Eudaimonia, a good spirit. The path from suffering to happiness. And you can also put it in even more stark terms and say the path from harm toward healing, the path from suffering toward happiness, is also the path from death toward life. The path toward life from death, the death of suffering, the death of your childhood, the death of your dreams, the death of all those things, toward life, a life where you learn and become what you are, where you live with a sense of peace toward yourself, and a stance of peace toward yourself, not a stance of war against yourself or against the world. That's the path toward life from death. The path to the Western lands, to the place of peace and wholeness, where we learn and become what we are. And it wasn't for me, for this guy, for me. It wasn't until I was a long, long way down the path to the Western lands before question started to mean something to me. I studied ancient Greek philosophy in college. I really threw myself into it. And the basic question that prompts Greek philosophy is, how do we live? What is the good life for a human? How do we live? What does it mean to live a good life? That is a question that was of abstract interest to me, academic interest. It didn't have any real meaning. I didn't feel that question in my bones until I got to the point where I was well on the trail to the Western lands. And I've been walking my daily miles for years. And I can tell you that right now that question means something to me. How do I live? And I have a better day whenever I started off thinking, how do I live my life? How do I live today? What does it mean? How should I live? How do I live? What is a good life for me? And I'll ask you that. Just ask yourself that question. You'll have a better day because of it. What is a good life for you? What would it mean for you to be farther down the trail to the Western lands? Leave me a comment and tell me. Consider that question. What is a good life for you? If your life was better than it is now, how would you know? What would that mean to you? That's an excellent question. You might not have any answer for it, and that's all right. That's your answer. I have no idea. That's your answer. Whatever the truth of your life is at this very moment, that's what it is, Pilgrim. I love you if you're a war zone kid. It is a beautiful day on the trail to the Western lands. Think about those questions. Leave me a comment. Let me know all about it. I'd love to hear from you. If you like this, send this video to someone else you think might like it. Head on over to my channel on YouTube at Trail to the Western Lands. Like and subscribe, do all that stuff. Let me know you're on the journey. We can travel today's miles on the trail to the Western lands together, Pilgrim. Daylight's burning. Let's get a move on.